Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Sunday, April 2nd, 2023. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I provide, go to weather.gov. That is the National Weather Service's online presence. It'll bring you to a map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. You point, click on anywhere on this map. It'll bring up the latest forecast with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories for anywhere in the country. A lot going on across the lower 48. We have another round of severe weather in portions of the southern plains, East Texas, tornado watches. But what's going to happen is a strong low is going to develop over the east side of the Rockies and Colorado and take a track through the central northern plains, producing blizzard conditions across areas of the Dakotas as we go, especially into Monday, Tuesday, early Wednesday. Ahead of this storm, there's going to be a big severe weather outbreak on Tuesday, including the potential for some long-tracked strong tornadoes from areas of Iowa, Illinois, southward. So stay tuned to later forecast. I'm sure there's going to be some nasty weather in the news once again as a result of that system. Here in Alaska, though, light snow is diminishing across the central and eastern interior, though some accumulating snow picked up around Fairbanks, 3 to 5 inches of snow in a number of spots there. Next system is going to push a front up into the southwest coast around Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays, and then redevelop a secondary low up through the Gulf Monday into Tuesday. We'll take a look at solar activity, moon phase, and what we can expect here for the rest of the aurora viewing season, because that is going to begin to wind down as we head toward the end of the month. We still expect, though, near or below normal temperatures through mid-April. No real change in the temperature outlook coming up here the next couple of weeks. Up along the Bering Strait at Wales, clear skies, lighter winds today, temperature at 3 above. If you recall, yesterday Kotzebue had blizzard conditions on Saturday. Conditions have improved there as well. Further inland, Alaskaket, as you get up toward the central interior, the light snow there is diminishing. Temperature at 26 early this afternoon. And then back toward the Aleutians, we have a frontal system pushing through Dutch Harbor on Alaska area. Overcast skies, 44 degrees with some showers around there. Along the southwest coast at Togiak, we expect a thickening cloud cover ahead of that frontal system. Temperature at 30, but you'll likely see some light snow developing very late tonight, especially as we go through Monday morning. Winter weather advisory is still in effect for areas of the central eastern interior, including areas around Bettles, Tanana, eastward through Fairbanks and Fort Yukon, but the snow continues to become lighter and more showery in nature, though just over 5.5 inches of snow did fall in Goldstream Valley, just northwest of Fairbanks, with this system since yesterday. And a quick check here on current solar activity. It has been low this weekend. We don't expect it to ramp up at least early in the week. The full pink moon of April comes up Wednesday evening, April 5th, so not a good time for aurora viewing just because of all that added moonlight. The new moon will occur Wednesday evening, April 19th, and it's near this time, a few days before and afterwards, if we do have the right conditions to look for the aurora, because the aurora viewing season is winding down now in a few weeks. Due to the decreasing amount of darkness at night, we are gaining over 5.5 minutes of daylight each day now as we head toward the summer solstice in June. Satellite imagery shows that moisture in through areas of the interior, pressing eastward into northwest Canada. We have a very weak remnant low in the north central Gulf, and then back out here to the west, a frontal system arcs ahead of a low pressure system now that's passing now near the western Aleutians, and this front will continue to press east-northeastward up along the southwest coast and through the Alaska Peninsula as we go through later tonight and on Monday. Here is that frontal system this afternoon. North side of it, a band of snow that'll be pushing up into Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays as we go through especially Monday morning. morning. Weak low over the northern Gulf will kind of wash out, and this triple point will develop a secondary low south of Kodiak Island as we go into Monday afternoon. So by pre-dawn hours, we expect the front to advance a little further up the Alaska Peninsula with that secondary low taking shape. Monday afternoon, south of Kodiak Island, this low will continue to develop slowly northeastward and be sitting over the central Gulf by the time we get into Tuesday afternoon, and that's going to bring the next chance of precipitation up into the Panhandle along areas of the northeastern Gulf Coast as we go into especially Tuesday night and on Wednesday. Push of moisture riding up along the Yukon River, west side of the Alaska Range, will force some areas of light snow all along the Yukon River and up through areas of the Brooks Range as we go in to the day on Tuesday. Low temperatures tonight will generally be a bit near or below freezing in the Panhandle, as cold as 4 below Copper River Basin at Glen Allen. Temperatures Monday afternoon should generally get above freezing now everywhere, mid-upper 30s in through Anchorage Bowl, western Kenai, 40s in through the Panhandle. Low temperatures Tuesday morning, not quite as cold across south central, and then readings by Tuesday afternoon should be near 40 degrees Anchorage through Talkeetna, even back on the other side of the Alaska Range at McGrath, and definitely in the 40s, maybe isolated 50-degree reading in the southern Panhandle. Lows across the north and central interior and Arctic coast, single digits above and below zero for Monday morning. Back up near or a bit above freezing, Fairbanks on up toward the Yukon Flats as well as Eagle, but in the single digits along the northwest coast at Wainwright and Point Lay. And low temperatures Tuesday morning could still be pretty cold there along the northwest Arctic coast in the 10s to near 20 below zero. And temperatures, though, should recover back up above freezing, mid and upper 30s on the north and west side of the Alaska Range, especially between there and the Yukon River. Temperatures across the southwest. Low temperatures Monday morning, still some single digits and teens across as you go up the Yukon and Kuskokwim River basins, but above freezing along the Alaska Peninsula, especially with that front pushing in. Temperatures on Monday afternoon will be in the low and mid 40s along the Alaska Peninsula back through Dutch Harbor and even creeping back up into the mid to upper 30s at like Bethel and Anvik. And then on Tuesday morning, temperatures continue to come upwards as that front pushes inland with that moisture, and we expect highs even on the west side of the Alaska Range, mid and upper 30s, a few spots near 40 degrees come Tuesday afternoon. And taking a look at the extended temperature outlook, this theme has been around now for at least a couple of weeks. We have not seen any widespread milder temperatures set up anywhere. We're just kind of stuck in this pattern, which is going to prolong the river breakup and snow melt. Even though we are going to see some melting snow, and we'll have that freeze-thaw cycle each day as temperatures get above freezing, especially in southern parts of the state, we're not anticipating an all-out melt-off. So as a result, it's looking like now as we approach mid-month, April 8th through the 12th, temperatures most likely to average below normal will be centered here on the southwest quadrant of the mainland, including areas around Cook Inlet from Anchorage on up toward McGrath and Garnet down toward Bethel and Dillingham. So we don't expect any really mild weather anytime soon. And as far as additional precipitation, we're entering one of the driest times of the year. We do expect precipitation to average below normal across the Alaska Peninsula, including Kodiak Island. However, with some weather systems that perhaps will be moving inland there, could trigger some areas of lighter precipitation, especially across the central and upper Yukon Valley, including areas along the Alcan border up to and north of the Brooks Range all the way toward the central Arctic coast, as well as portions of the Panhandle. But at this point, we don't see any really big storms on the horizon, but just keep in mind temperatures will likely average below normal.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Here is your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned either on Monday or Tuesday, weak area of low pressure just north of Utqiagvik will continue to drift north-northwestward up into the Arctic Ocean. We had some moisture, some areas of light snow, lower ceilings push across the interior over the course of the weekend. That'll continue to work its way eastward. Any lingering moisture could cause some lower ceilings as we go through early Monday morning. Main area, though, of IFR is across the Alaska Peninsula out over the central Bering. This is associated associated with low pressure that's out there in the central Bering with a frontal system arcing southeastward, and this system has a triple point where a secondary low will be developing just south of Kodiak Island by Monday afternoon. So we'll have the one remnant low over here pushing a frontal system into the coast, creating a broad area of IFR conditions from St. Matthew, St. Paul along the southwest, Kuskokwim, Bristol Bay areas across the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island into the southwestern Gulf. And by the time we get into Tuesday morning, that low will begin to lift out of the southwestern Gulf toward the central Gulf here by later in the day on Tuesday. But still, a widespread area of IFR conditions are expected from the central Arctic coast across the Brooks Range down through much of the western half of the mainland. And by Tuesday afternoon, that area may shrink a little bit with the daytime heating and so forth. But nevertheless, broad areas of IFR from areas of the North Slope and Brooks Range down through the central Yukon Valley, especially western Alaska Range, out along areas of the Gulf up to Prince William Sound, Bristol Bay westward out toward St. Paul and just south of St. Matthew. So past conditions on Monday, Anaktuvik Pass IFR becoming MVFR. Same thing, Atigan Pass, some IFR conditions early in the day Monday, giving way to MVFR. Lake Clark and Merrill start out with VFR conditions early in the morning, giving way to IFR conditions as that frontal system, moisture and precipitation moves in from the south and west. Rainy Pass will see VFR become MVFR. Windy Pass should generally be able to hold on to VFR conditions during the day on Monday, just a little longer. Isabel may see some MVFR conditions in the morning give way to VFR. Same thing, Matasta Pass, some areas of MVFR there giving way to VFR conditions. Further south and west as we go through the Copper River Basin, Tanita Pass, VFR conditions, and Portage Pass should generally be VFR on Monday. Further east in the north end of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White will also hold on to VFR conditions during the day on Monday. Freezing levels at the surface run from the central Bering down along Bristol Bay coastline toward the entrance of Cook Inlet along the east side of the Kenai, northern Gulf Coast, in through the inner channels of the Panhandle. Freezing levels aloft bump up to above 6,000 feet there through the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, southward up above 8,000 feet. The greatest threat for icing will be along this frontal system, the main low back here toward the central Bering with the front arcing out ahead of it with the secondary low developing south of Kodiak Island on Monday. Generally, because of the higher freezing levels aloft, 10,000 to a flight level 18,000 feet, there could be some considerable moderate icing in these areas. Along the leading edge of the colder air and where there may be some snow above 6,000 feet, there's your push inland from Bristol Bay, and then above 4,000 feet near the low center. And upper level jet stream winds, we have a ridge up through the southeastern portion of the mainland with a max of 125 to 30 knot jet max out of the northwest along the British Columbia coast. And at 9,000 feet, 700 millibars, we see a reflection of a low there along the British Columbia coast. Winds upwards of 50 knots there just to the south of Haida Gwaii. And then we have the low sitting out in the central Bering with a belt of winds upwards of 45, 50 knots there across the eastern Aleutians, pushing into the tip of the Alaska Peninsula. And then at 3,000 feet, we see the hints of that secondary low development there near Kodiak Island. That's going to be pulling up into the Gulf ahead of it. Look for south to southeast winds. There could be some stronger winds coming in through the entrance of Cook Inlet and up over areas near Lake Iliamna. And then back out here through the lower Bering and through the eastern half of the Aleutians, winds out of the west there at 35 knots. So we expect rather broad area of considerable moderate turbulence here from the entrance of Cook Inlet up along the Alaska Range. Could even be up over 8,000 feet there in the vicinity of the Alaska Range, a pocket of surface to 4,000 foot turbulence up there toward the east central interior, and then back out across Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, and extending out from St. Paul down through the central Aleutians from the surface to 4,000 feet. Expect some considerable moderate turbulence.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the Earth and grows our food. While the Sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the Sun doesn't stay at the Sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the Sun, radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted, from causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the Sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the Sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. And this is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane about 30, 45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the Sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the Sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy. And then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button, it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button, it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I, as a human being, can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system's going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and we'll look now at the sea ice edge as we do at the beginning of our marine segment. Ice is in place across the far north along the Arctic coast through the lower Chukchi Sea and the Bering Strait, though we do have some plinias that have opened up along south and southeast shoreline there of Norton Sound, as well as around St. Lawrence Island. Further south and west, the ice edge continues to gradually shrink, melting a bit. We're not anticipating any more advanced south with this ice as we look ahead here, at least early in the week. Overall, looking back on some of the ice data, it looks like we reached the maximum extent of our winter ice back in mid-March, and we'll have official word on that coming up in another week or two. For the inner panhandle, the inner channels, winds will be out of the north as high as 20 knots up there at Lynn Canal, 15 knots St. Stephen's Passage, where waves will be running 3 to 4 feet. The outer coast, a mixed bag of winds northerly off of Sitka, 15 knots, wave 7 feet, variable off of Gustavus, easterly 10 knots there west of Yakutat. By Tuesday, approaching frontal system, a low centered out over the central Gulf, will cause winds to be southeast 10 to 15 knots. Inner channels with waves running a couple of few feet. Southeast winds 25 to 30 knots, turning easterly once you get Gustavus back toward Yakutat. And then on Monday, we expect winds in the northwestern Gulf to have an east-or-northeasterly component. Northeast wind 10 knots, Prince William Sound, waves a couple of feet. North to northeast winds through lower Cook Inlet 20 to 25 knots with waves 5 to 6 feet at the entrance of Cook Inlet. And for Tuesday, we anticipate with that low off here in the central Gulf, winds to be out of the northeast and north, anywhere from 20 knots within Prince William Sound, 30, 35 knots off the Kenai coastline, as high as 45 knots there southeast of Cordova. Waves could be as high as 10 to 15 feet here in the open waters of the Gulf, and then 5 to 6 feet down there through Lower Cook Inlet toward the entrance. Around Kodiak Island on Monday afternoon, a low will be taking shape just south-southeast of the island. Winds will be out of the east-northeast, 20-25 knots, waves 5 to 7 feet. Meanwhile, frontal system that's worked its way up, helping to develop that secondary low, kind of a mixed bag of winds, 10 to 15 knots, waves 5 feet or so on the North Pacific side, and 1 to 3 feet on the Bering side. For Tuesday, the low takes better shape, kind of behind me over the central Gulf, northeast to north winds over Kodiak Island at 20 knots, waves 6 to as high as 8 feet as you get within 15 miles of the shoreline there of Kodiak Island. Winds more variable toward the central Alaska Peninsula, and then we see winds with a westerly component, southwest or northwest 15 knots behind that front. Across the Aleutian chain, the eastern and central Aleutians will see winds of 20 to 25 knots from the southwest, picking up to 30 knots from Atka westward through Adak. Waves generally 7 to 10 feet on the North Pacific side, 4 to 7 feet on the Bering side. And for Tuesday, winds come down further, generally a westerly component to the wind at 20 knots, and waves 6-7 feet on the North Pacific side, and generally in the 5 to 6 foot range on the Bering Sea side. And across the southwest coast, where the ice is in place ahead of that front, east winds 25 knots out of Bristol Bay and Kuskokwim Bays. East wind out of Norton Sound 20 knots. And we have the low just to the northwest of St. Paul, winds southwest ahead of it at 20 knots behind the front, northeasterly on the backside of the low at 25 knots at St. Matthew. And for Tuesday, as that low works its way into the southwest coast, crossing near the Etolan Strait, winds turn northerly on the backside to 25 knots through Norton Sound and off the lower Yukon Delta, but still southerly up into Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays at 10 to 15 knots. And along the Arctic coast, winds will be southwest to west 15 to 20 knots on Monday, especially from Point Lay all the way to Kaktovik with ice in place. Winds a little more of a mixed bag, variable 5 to 15 knots in the lower Chukchi Sea, turning northeasterly, 15 to 20 knots on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And for Tuesday, winds will have a northerly component along the Arctic coast at 10 to 15 knots, increasing north winds through the lower Chukchi Sea at 20 knots, increasing to 25 knots through the Bering Strait and on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. By Monday afternoon, that secondary low will be taking shape just south and southeast of Kodiak Island. This feature will work its way northeastward up into the central Gulf by Tuesday afternoon, with the other low working its way inland and weakening by Tuesday afternoon across areas of the southwest coast and interior.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.